feel like I've only just scratched the surface. I'm the current European editor at Mining Media International, so I write for Engineering and Mining Journal. I think we underestimate the impact that media coverage has on the mining narrative. Sometimes I find the best way to go about this actually is to look at which stories aren't being told. Leaders who model these behaviours, who show more vulnerability. It's really true. That's how we learn and grow.
Hello. Thank you for joining us on Oratory. Today, my guest is Carly Leonida. She's a highly respected mining writer, editor, and communications consultant with over 15 years of experience shaping how we talk about the mining industry. She's the founder of The Intelligent Miner, an online publication dedicated to creating honest, engaging, and nuanced conversations around mining, sustainability, and innovation. She's worked with some of the world's leading mining publications, including Mining Magazine and Mining Media International. She's passionate about amplifying diverse perspectives from Indigenous voices to the next generation to help the industry better understand how it's perceived by the outside world. Through her work, she challenges mining professionals to become better storytellers, bridging the gap between technical realities and the values and expectations of communities, media, and stakeholders beyond the mine site. I'm so excited to have you here today, Carly. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Well, my famous first question is the hardest one of the entire interview. So,
Okay.
What's getting you excited about your work?
We have had some really amazing topics on The Intelligent Miner this year and some really brilliant spokespeople. So we've been doing a lot recently around people and social acceptance in the mining industry, which has been absolutely fascinating to dive into. So we've had some stuff around stakeholder engagement. We had a really powerful piece actually last week on combating gender-based violence in the mining industry, which that's such a massive topic. I feel like I've only just scratched the surface, but I've made some really amazing contacts and I can't wait to learn more and to help get that information out in the world, because it's so important that we know about it and that we have these conversations, even if we don't have all the answers right now. Let's just talk about it. Let's get it out in the open. Yeah, that's been really interesting. And then we've got some stuff coming up on exploration and development, capital projects, which is always a good one to dive into. Yeah. And then we've got some stuff around governance and working with mining boards and liaising with them. We've got so much coming up, and I know that we've got some brilliant stuff coming up next year as well. It's a community-led publication, so we've got 50 founding members who help to shape what goes into our editorial calendars every year and keep me true and tell me what I need to be writing about. So I feel like we're always really close to the mark with what stories need to be told.
Well, I absolutely agree with that. And, I've been a follower for quite some time. And so your piece last week was that with the one with Beth, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, it was very, very powerful. And I felt like, as you said, sometimes we're just beginning to scratch the surface on some of these topics, but at least we're having the conversations instead of sort of whispering about it in between conference meetings and things like that. I think having the opportunity and the platform to talk about it so others can join in and share their perspective or experiences is really valuable.
It is, and I have to give credit to Beth and Peggy Bell as well, who they're from the Femina Collective, and they really, when we talked about this in January and just expressed how frustrated and angry we were at some of the news that's been coming out of the industry, they encouraged me to channel that into something productive. And without that encouragement, it might not have happened. So kudos to them.
Well, they do a great job of helping find that voice, and I'm grateful for them for that. And, I think in my experience in talking to people globally about issues like this, is that sometimes it takes that little push, right? Because otherwise we don't do it, or we think it needs to be perfection before it's out there, and that's just stifling.
100%. I'm happy to do that. I will be that girl who kicks the hornet's nest if need be.
Well, we appreciate you for that. And, there have been several others. I know you just did something with Dr. Hayden Mort, and he's one of your founding members. And so, he and I have partnered on this several times at this point. And so I've been learning here in the background, and so I'm really excited to have you sort of flip it and have you on the show. Some of what I would love to talk with you about today revolves mostly around your take and your experiences sort of as an editor and as a writer, and how you find that lens to tell the stories. Because as part of what we did offline in one of our initial conversations was really talk a little bit about, when you have an editor, sometimes that voice, sometimes that lens changes. And now you have that creative freedom and your 50 founding members to sort of shape how some of these stories are told. How does that impact what you're putting out there and the decisions that you make in terms of content?
Sometimes I find the best way to go about this actually is to look at which stories aren't being told. It's often the conversations that we're all having at events, or we're standing around the water cooler discussing, or somebody will send an email saying, oh, what did you think of XYZ? Wouldn't it be great if we had a piece on this? Those are the stories that I look for. I think we're very good in the mining media at retreading the same topics again and again. And don't get me wrong, we've had a lot of progression over the past 10, 20, 30 years. And it's really important that we track that. I also think there are a lot of topics that we aren't talking about, but are absolutely critical to the future of mining. So there's not as much as there could be around different ESG related topics. There's not as much as there could be around diversity, equity and inclusion, some of the issues that are still plaguing us in that arena, around the environment, biodiversity, things like that. Also, there are some topics that are really nuanced, that aren't just about mining technology or mining equipment or finance, but require you to write across all of those areas and to have a good understanding of how changes in one area affect changes in the next.
Yeah.
And that's for a variety of reasons, but fundamentally, I don't think the industry is investing enough in training its writers. People are coming and going quite quickly. We're seeing a lot of turnover at some publications. And I really think that it would be great to think a bit harder about retention and about training those journalists and investing a bit more into them, essentially, so that they can put together some of these articles that we really need, that reflect what's going on in the industry right now, not just the surface level stuff. But on the topic of, you asked how we got into this discussion, earlier on in the year, our May 2025 editorial theme on the intelligent miner was perspectives of mining.
Yep.
And that came about because I was reading around, I think it was on Gen Z actually, and opinions of the mining industry and why we're not getting enough people into that talent pipeline. And I was doing some research and I thought, there's a lot of numbers here, but there's not actually a lot of perspectives from members of Gen Z. So I read a report, I think it was from Australia's Mining and Automotive Skills Alliance, that surveyed, I think it was 1,000 members of Gen Z, essentially kids who are aged between 15 and 24. And they came out with a number, I think it was around 72 to 73% of those kids had no interest in working in mining whatsoever. And that number correlated with another question that they asked, why you wouldn't work in mining. And those kids said mining does more harm than good, so why wouldn't we want to? But there was no further information into that. So I think we focus maybe too much on numbers in this industry, and we need to start reading between the lines a little bit if we want to solve talent issues, if we want to look at community opposition and why people are disagreeing with what we want to do. There's so much there that we could dig into, and there are very few places where people who aren't members of the mining and metals community can go to share their opinions in their own voice, in their own style, with their own opinions.
Yeah.
We just don't have that space, and I really wanted to create that.
I admire that very much, because I think that's absolutely what I see in my work as a recruiter. And even when they accidentally get into mining, sometimes, their perspective of being a geologist or somebody who's involved in environmental or perhaps in legal or HR or something, and they've found themselves supporting mining in some variety of ways. I tell them all the time, seek counsel, talk to people, read articles, join groups, educate yourself. And I think that we can learn as much from Gen Z and others that have come into it with a very different perspective than we can from when we suffer from sort of groupthink, because we've all said the same things and worked together and done it the same way forever. And so I really think there's so much value in telling the story of alternative perspectives and having a platform for those to go to that's not so technical and only about, tailings or processing technique or something like that just bores them to death that they have no interest in. And so I think it's so important to do that. And something you touched on as part of the problem inherently in some of the mining journalism that's out there is also plaguing the industry more broadly, right? So training them, keeping them, all of these things, it's a strategy, and you have to be understanding of the demographic that you're looking to attract so that you can keep them. And I think we've sort of missed that for a long time, and I'm perhaps paying a lot of attention to it, but I feel encouraged that we're having conversations around the human side and all of the harder, nuanced conversations, as you mentioned, in what mining supports or why it's hard. And I think that that's important but difficult. But we're having those conversations more often, and I can't help but see the glasses half full that perhaps we're making some progress.
Yeah, I would agree. And actually, some of my favorite articles and topics to write about in recent years have been about people. And I think putting people front and center in our storytelling is really key as well, not just in our sort of strategies, but in the actual stories we write. Whenever people come and guest write for me on The Intelligent Miner, I always say, do it in your own voice. Put yourself at the front of that. Tell me your opinions. Tell me your stories and experience, because at the end of the day, people are interested in people.
That's right.
Above everything else. And we've got some really interesting people in this industry. So that just telling those stories can create an in for people from outside of the sector as well to come and get involved.
Absolutely. Well, something that we talked about previously that I want to dig into a little bit, you've brought in all kinds of different voices. So Indigenous writers, recently a high school student. What did those outside perspectives reveal about how mining is seen from where they sit?
Often that mining isn't seen very well, but part of that is related to, I think, the fact that if we don't allow people to come and share their perspectives of mining with us, then they're going to go share them with other people, and they probably aren't going to look great because we've essentially closed the door. I think at the end of the day, mining exists to serve people. We produce minerals and metals that enable modern life. They are there for humanity. And because of that, everybody's probably heard me talk about this, but I think everybody is a mining stakeholder by virtue of the fact that we use these products in our daily lives. And so I think essentially, like, communication in the media, it's stakeholder engagement. We don't always think of it in that way. When we talk about stakeholder engagement, we think about primary stakeholders, so your shareholders, your community members, people like that. But actually, there's a whole other area of risk and opportunity there that we aren't addressing.
Yeah.
Stakeholder engagement can materially affect businesses, and we're not doing that as well as we could when it comes to communication, particularly in the media. And yeah, I think creating space essentially for different voices to come through. Some of the time that can also offer not just new perspectives, but new solutions to problems that we have been circling on for years or decades in some cases.
Sure. I do it all the time.
I got on my soapbox and then was like,
wait, where was I going with that? Groceries.
Yeah. What was I saying? Finding new solutions to old problems. Oh yeah, and there are some things like members of Gen Z are really great with digital technologies. I look at my kids and the way that they're learning coding at school already, even though they're 8 and 10 years old. And one of the articles that we ran on The Intelligent Miner during May was from a high school student who was really into gaming. She really loved Minecraft and things like that. And she was exploring some of the ways that we can use those technologies within the industry to improve things like operator training, to improve safety processes and procedures. And it was just really great to get a different perspective on that. Coming from a generation where I didn't grow up with those digital technologies. I didn't get a computer at home until I was nearly 15. I didn't get a mobile phone until I was probably 16, I think.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating to see the different takes. I'm a naturally curious person, so I can't help but want to seek out those people.
I think it's really interesting that you say that because, I have a 5-year-old and he's very much like trying to figure out Minecraft because my 14-year-old loves it and has sort of like let him into his little world that they've created. And he's like, "This is your job, Mom." And I'm like, "Well, that's not entirely, but it's pretty cool." And he's like, "This is the coolest." And, I think having that exposure and translating some of that into some really cool potential. I mean, from where I sit, thinking about how do we train people so that they can really grab onto that knowledge, whether it's gamification or micro learning courses or going into a traditional classroom setting, understanding how people learn and the knowledge that they're asking for. We have so many cool tools and opportunities that for us not to ask the question of those who we have interest in understanding so that we could draw them into the industry, it's just foolish not to consider that perspective. And so, I really so appreciate that you're already doing that and creating that space and giving us the opportunity to read those articles and understand from that lens, essentially. And it's just so, so powerful.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad it's resonating. And that's something else that I've noticed actually just through my work. We all work in mining, we're really passionate about it, but when it comes to communication, we don't need to ram that down people's throats. We don't need to say we're the best.
Yeah.
Just like you say, show them some of the cool stuff that's going on. You're interested in mechanics and trucks? Great, we've got the biggest ones, come and have a look. You're interested in gaming and automation? Fantastic, we've got all the best tools. We've been doing this since the 80s.
Yeah.
There are so many ins if we just offer people that chance to come and see what we're doing.
I agree. And going to a mine site or seeing it is magic. And part of what I fail to understand is that there's so many scenarios where mine sites don't let us take pictures or have videos, and the ability to share that on broader social media platforms specifically to, that are tailored to younger people, I think is remiss. Like, we're just missing that opportunity at this point. And so that's a very different soapbox of mine that I don't know how to solve at the moment. But like Jess Scanlon, she's doing such a great job, and there's so many other content creators that are bringing some of that knowledge front and center, but it's an uphill battle. And I loved that Jess shared something about the actual ability to make money from these things and the amount of time that's spent on her and doing it, and that's like 10 cents an hour or something crazy. And so my older son is like, "Oh, content creators are making tons of money." And I'm like, no. Not all of them, my friend.
That was such a powerful post, and that really got me talking with people in the industry. And there are solutions, but I really think we don't just need innovation in communication, we need innovation in marketing as well.
Yes.
And I'm excited to see that as we start getting people into marketing roles from outside of the mining industry who are used to engaging with content creators and supporting them in different ways, that's going to be such a big step towards connecting with younger people, with getting stuff on TikTok, on YouTube, on Instagram. It's a massive area that we're just not addressing at the moment, and it's as important as innovation in any other area of mining.
I 100% agree, and I think it will change. I think we're at this very interesting pivot point from where I sit, where we're starting to understand and we're starting to see some more mass media about mining, but it's usually like this company did X, Y, and Z and people don't understand it, or we need critical minerals or something from a broad perspective. But I think when we drill into the core of what we're talking about, having that outside perspective and saying, hey, we all use it, we all influence it, and you can come in and instead of saying mining makes a mess, you could be an environmental professional impacting how we do this differently, or you can be a communications professional impacting how we talk about it differently so that it reaches different ears. And so it's really interesting to me. But I think, something else that warrants conversation, I think that everybody has different values and expectations, and often we don't have the tool sets as mining professionals to adapt our language and tone and framing. And I think you have this really remarkable ability to cater your communication to reach those with alternative value sets. And so how do you do that? How do we train other people to figure that out? I mean, it's sort of your magic skill, but how do we help others to figure that out?
I think first and foremost, we need to understand the audience, and often that just takes listening. We just need to listen, whether that's asking them what they need and doing a bit of research and reading around that, or if, for instance, you're working with an editor on a publication, whether that's trade publication or the general media, take a bit of time to listen to what they have to say about their audience and what matters to them. Who are they? Where do they come from? What's their demographic? That for me is really key. So for instance, if I were writing an article for a trade publication, which I do, I'm the current European editor at Mining Media International, so I write for Engineering and Mining Journal. You can assume a level of knowledge about mining and metals. I will quite often use like acronyms, so things like, if we're talking about JORC codes, I wouldn't feel the need to spell that out, or LHDs, load haul dumpers, we all know that. But if I were writing for a more general publication, or even for the intelligent miner, because part of what we do is bridging that gap between those in and outside of the mining industry, I would take the time to break that down and explain to people what an LHD is, where we use them, use plain English. There are also, we can add things now like hyperlinks, because online publishing, this is wonderful, so that people can have a bit of further reading and can go away if there's something that interests them, or they think, I don't quite understand that. They can click that link and get the information they need. Yeah, I think putting the audience front and center is really key. And then quite often, much to my husband's dismay, I will make him read articles that I'm going to publish on the Intelligent Miner or someone else who works for me in the company. Will you read this? Will you tell me if somebody who comes from outside of the mining industry, is this interesting and engaging to you, even if you don't fully understand all of the concepts in it? Sometimes just getting that kind of weather check is really important. So ask someone in your family, ask a colleague, whoever, just to read over what you've written. And also, it's really hard, but try to leave bias outside when you're writing. We don't need to, as I said, we don't need to sing the mining and metals industry's praises. Just give them the facts, and people will form their own opinions, and that's okay. Maybe they'll like it, maybe they won't, but we can talk about it afterwards. I think it's really important. I always have a call to action with most of my social media posts, or at the bottom of articles saying, let's talk about this. It's okay if you don't agree with me, but let's have a chat. I think that's really key.
I like that very much, because I think sometimes when we're so convicted that we know all of the information, it's a turnoff, right? And so saying, what can I learn from you? What is your perspective? How can we have a dialogue around whatever the issue is or whatever the information is? I think that's really important. And something that you mentioned at the very beginning of this topic specifically is listening. Sometimes when we're a subject matter expert, we fail to listen. We think we have all the information and we present it, rather than say, how could this be perceived? Or, what do they need to know? Or how should I give more information on this very technical piece, instead of just launch right into whatever it is? Sometimes we're missing those pieces and we lose the reader, we lose the audience because of it. And so listening is such a important part of what we all get to do, and really an underrated skill.
It is in so many areas, but that is what will help us distill down the information that we can provide to make our communications more effective.
Well, and as you said, that listening is what you do at conferences, at the water cooler, at whatever, and that allows you to pick up the really cool areas that you get to put on Intelligent Miner. And so I think that lens is really interesting to me, and I love that so much. Something else I'd love to kind of talk about a little bit further with you is sort of the role of media coverage and how it shapes the mining narrative, and how can industry leaders better contribute or influence some of that media coverage? Because I think often it's reactive rather than proactive, or it's covering a death, or it's covering a failure or something like that. So, maybe that's just what I'm seeing in some of the mass media, but how do we influence that differently from within?
It's a tough one. And you're right, the industry does tend to be really reactive rather than proactive on this. But I think it's going to take companies to step forward. I think we underestimate the impact that media coverage has on the mining narrative, not just on news sites or in general publications, but if we look at things like film and the way that mining is portrayed in films, look at like Avatar.
It's always the dirty bad.
It's the baddie. We're always the baddie.
Yeah.
We complain about that, but then we don't provide any other information to combat it. So I think stepping forward and engaging more, even if it's off the back of a bad news story. This is a theoretical example, but say there was a mine collapse. Let's step in and talk about the fact that we've actually got amazingly trained mine rescue teams in lots of key jurisdictions. What goes into that? We put safety first so much. Let's not just focus on the bad, but on the good too. Yeah. A good PR firm will help you to do that. There are lots of ways that we can do it. I think also we should be inviting the general media to mining events. We don't do that. And likewise, it would be great to see more mining companies speaking at general business events, or those from other industries, things like oil and gas, energy, automotive, because actually we've got a really important role to play in their value chains. So that would be great too. I think you touched upon different social media and the fact that we could use that a lot more. I really think we could. At the moment, the industry is mainly on LinkedIn and some companies are on Instagram. But like you say, if we want to be talking to different audiences, then we need to look at where they are. And if that's younger people, if it's Gen Alpha like our kids, or Gen Z, we need to be going to TikTok. We need to be going to, I don't know, what other platforms there are. I can't think of any others.
I know, I'm not that cool.
I am not on TikTok personally, but I appreciate the fact that companies need to be. And yeah, we need to invest in people with those skills or that knowledge, people like Jess Scanlon, who can help us to do that and understand. And there's no shame in asking for help. It's so important. If we haven't got our arms around it, that is okay. But let's just find someone who knows what we need to know.
I agree. And being a non-technical person in the mining industry, I routinely ask for help, and I am very infrequently met with somebody who tells me I have a silly question, or I shouldn't be asking that, or anything else. And I imagine that in the reverse scenario, for us in mining to go outside and say, hey, we need some help to tell this story, or what's your perspective, or however that might look, there is no shame in it, right? Ask the question. But I think that often in these podcasts, I tell people it's the risk of being vulnerable, right? Mm-hmm. And if we aren't vulnerable, we don't ask some of these hard questions or have some of these harder, conversations and write about it and talk about it, it gets really, really tricky. And so vulnerability is a big thing. And we have to kind of get out of our own way and just say, okay, I'm going to be the vulnerable voice in the room and ask the hard question.
Yeah. And to be honest, when I see people do that, it garners so much respect. We talk about this all the time, about the fact that we need leaders who model these behaviors, who show more vulnerability. It's really true. That's how we learn and grow at the end of the day, collectively and individually. We need a Brené Brown to come in and shake things up.
I find it really interesting. You go to other conferences, and my background's HR, and so I've been to HR conferences and mining conferences, and HR is pretty cross-industry. You don't have to be in automotive, you don't have to be in mining, but they have speakers like that come in and lead and inspire and motivate and talk about some of these, more personal things. And we don't always do that in mining. We have a keynote on technology or, wind or something like that. And so I would love to see us shake it up a little bit and start talking about more of the human side and have a keynote on that. So maybe we need to invite Brené.
Maybe. You know what? I've been doing a leadership development course recently that is being co-led by a neuroscientist. And it has been fascinating to learn about that side of things and how that influences our leadership styles and how we can improve and evolve essentially. And my gosh, some of the conversations that have come up off the back of that are astounding within the group. He's going to be giving the keynote at the World Mining Congress next year in Peru. So if anybody else is interested in that, you can come along to the event and see him speak about it too.
That would be wonderful. I've never been to that conference, but I've heard good things about it. And I keep trying to get my husband to come with us to summer in Peru so the boys can figure out how to speak Spanish. So perhaps this is my opportunity to go to a really cool mining conference and go to the summer so we all get, we'll figure it out. So, one sort of not last question, but one other area that I think warrants conversation, because I think your perspective on it would be really interesting, is what kind of advice would you give to somebody who is trying to talk to potentially a mining opponent or somebody who's uninformed or skeptical about what we do in mining? How do we have a conversation that's not just boasting, that's not just telling them that we're great or telling them that they're wrong? How do you have that conversation more productively from your perspective?
I would say, and this is something that I've learned from this leadership development course, when you're in a situation with somebody who might be opposing your views and there's the potential for it to get quite heated or emotive, when you're actually in that situation, it is very hard not to react and to become defensive. However, if you go into that conversation having set the tone, having set the intention of staying neutral, of staying open, of showing humility, that can really influence your ability to stay true to that when you're actually in the situation under pressure. And I think the same is true of any type of communication, whether that's written, whether it's on social media, whether it's on a podcast, whether it's on a debate on Newsnight. That setting the tone for how you want to go in is so important. Trying to remain unbiased, listening to what the other person is saying. It's not that their views are wrong, their views are absolutely valid. And I think we need to reflect that, listen to it, and then say, it's okay if you don't like what I'm saying or what I'm doing, but let's talk about it. Let's find a solution that works for everybody. And quite often, I think when it comes to mining projects, we end up with much better outcomes if we're willing to meet people where they're at.
Sure.
And listen to what they've got to say, and to help fill in any knowledge gaps on both sides. Quite often that the bone of contention could be based on misunderstanding. So let's just go into it and see where the conversation goes and accept that we're not going to have all the answers.
Yeah.
That is okay. For me, that's the most important thing. It's how you set the tone, how you approach the conversation, whatever form it's in.
Thank you for that. And I always love to learn from other people who get to be in those environments, right? Because I feel like you get to talk to a huge array of individuals with very different perspectives and sitting in different corners of mining and outside of it. Sometimes I'm so stuck in the midst of it that I don't always get those outside perspectives. Then I'm challenged by talking to a neighbor who is like, oh, you support the mining industry. And I'm like, well, where do I start? How do we have this conversation? So thank you for sharing that. I think there's so many really interesting angles that you get to cover on The Intelligent that I'm always fascinated by what you're writing about and the people that you have on both podcast and as guest writers, etc. What can we be looking forward to coming up? You mentioned a few things, but what can we be looking forward to that might be very different?
So we have a workshop, our first workshop coming up in September. We've not done these before, so it'll be interactive. This one is on storytelling, so it works really well with what we're talking about here. And it's about breaking out of the mining echo chamber, how we craft stories that are compelling and engaging, how we get other people telling our stories as well. So we've got Jessica Scanlon from Mine Life Media. She's a geologist. She's out talking to people about this every day. And she's going to come and share some of her experiences and what she's hearing from people and how you can channel that into effective social media strategies. We've got Dr. Hayden Mort from Geologize, who is obviously a neuroscientist. He does a lot of amazing work in geocommunication. So he's going to talk to us about the sort of science behind storytelling and ways that we can get people engaged. And then we've got Dr. Ian Stewart as well from the University of Plymouth, who has all kinds of amazing accolades, and he's made documentaries for the BBC. And he's going to be talking to us about storytelling techniques, different frameworks and methodologies that we can use to hook people and take them on this journey in whatever form that is, whether it's a presentation, whether it's an article, whether it's, I don't know, a video, something along those lines. So that's a subscriber-only workshop. It's going to be on the 9th of September. And I can send you the link if people are interested in signing up.
Yes, please.
And then there's going to be a lovely workbook afterwards that people can take back to their own organisations as well and keep, so they've got all that good information stored away. That is probably the most exciting thing we've got coming up later this year. And then we're going to be relaunching our podcast in January.
That's very exciting. I love the workshop. I think that there's huge value in it, and I tend to work with the companies that are a little bit smaller or sort of more on the startup side, and sometimes just getting the CEO or whomever is out there talking about it, I see such huge advantage for those individuals to take part in something like this. So I will share it, absolutely. So that's super exciting. I can't come, but I wish I could.
It's going to be recorded, so even if you can't come,
oh good,
yeah, so you can watch it back in your own time.
Well, excellent. So, I guess in looking at closing, is there anything that you want to leave our listeners with, or, a word of advice, a piece of Carly wisdom that you can give us in parting?
Ooh. Communication isn't just about articles and about writing. It's about how we approach conversations day to day, whether that's with someone in our lives, on the school run, a neighbour, whether it's someone in a work setting. There is something that we can all do, however small, to improve the narrative around mining through better communication. And yeah, I think that's probably the best I've got.
I love it, and I thank you for being here with me. It's always such a pleasure to visit with you, and I'm very excited about your upcoming workshop and everything else for that matter. You always partner with great people, so thank you for taking the time with me and sharing it, and we will have to do it again another time.
Most definitely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely to be here.
Thank you, Carly. We'll talk soon.